So my name is Sarah Atkins and I'm a senior lecturer at the Law School, which is part of the Faculty of Business and Law. My research area is asylum seeker and children's human rights. My teaching is sort of separate to that, but I try and get as much of my research into my teaching as I can get away with. What about you?
My name is Dr. Kieran Walsh-Atkins. I'm an associate professor in the School of Law. The research that I do is really around the legal regulation of family life, with a particular emphasis on issues around family violence.
I'm Becky Miles, Digital Communications Manager here within the Faculty of Business and Law. So obviously I don't have an area of research expertise, but instead I'm one of the members of staff that gets to try and support and push out the great work that you are both doing.
So let me say a bit more about my research. I was a qualified solicitor. I was doing research while practicing, and then at a certain point a teaching role came up at University of Portsmouth. But since I've gotten the senior lecturer role, I get research hours with that. So now I get paid to research, which is a huge novelty for me. What about you, Kieran?
Similar, I did my undergrad in law and I practiced as a barrister in Ireland for a couple of years, but frankly, I hated it. While I was doing that, I was researching with a government-appointed Special Rapporteur on Child Protection in Ireland. And while I was researching with him, I realised that research is what I wanted to do full-time. Rather than doing a straightforward PhD in law, I did my PhD actually in sociology to look at the ways in which the legal framework around child protection in Ireland had changed in a way that mapped onto different sociological processes. And that made me acutely aware of the importance of doing cross-disciplinary and interdisciplinary research. So the last major project I did, I was spent a couple of years looking at how courts deal with domestic abuse allegations in child contact cases, because there's rules around how these things are supposed to work, and there's supposed to be an emphasis on safety over contact. And I found that the systems are simply not being implemented. Using those different types of mixed methods, I've been able to build up a picture of how the legal system is failing people and how the study of legal rules in isolation really isn't a suitable way, I think, for understanding the complexities of how it operates. And really, spent a lot of time evidence gathering now.
Actually, we often maybe don't realise the impact and the sort of what our research is actually doing. You know, but yours is both of yours are great examples there. Do you think you're having sort of more or less impact now being an academic to when you were actually within industry working, or do you think it's sort of a mixture? Or
So my research, based on my articles that I've done so far, the impact is, how do I put it, more of an academic impact rather than saying, oh, I reformed this law.
I suppose the difficulty is that you're at the mercy, really, of prevailing winds.
Yes.
A person could spend 10 or 20 years doing wonderful research and empirical research on their particular area, but if it's not something that is going to necessarily be picked up by Westminster.
Yep.
What I've seen over the last kind of 12, 18 months is two particular things in relation to impact. So in one context, the work that I was doing on family courts, it wasn't so much that work was picked up directly by policymakers, but charities and campaign groups picked up some of it. Yeah. The other thing is that sometimes, I said there's a second branch where you have to sometimes chase the impact, is something Sarah and I did together with some colleagues, was replies to calls for evidence that come out from parliamentary committees.
Yes.
So we sent evidence to a House of Lords committee on reforming child maintenance payments. And we were the most cited academic response in that report. So we were in a similar position to the major campaigning organisations.
I've also been involved in things like other areas of the House of Commons and Parliament also put out calls for other things. So there's this organisation within the Parliament called PostNote.
Yeah.
I don't know if you heard of it. And it's more to do with science and technology, but it came to my attention that they were looking for external peer reviewers in academia for a post note that they were putting together in relation to age assessment of asylum seeker children.
Yeah. Yes.
So there was that was the science side of it, but then they wanted some legal academics input as well, because it's not just a medical issue, it's not just a science issue, it's also ethical and legal issues too. And so I was one of the 24 or so legal academics who cast their eye and gave their feedback on this post note. There's numerous ways in which you can kind of influence, and then if you do it enough times, I suppose it accumulates to impact.
And I've found that some stuff that I've written has been cited in, the Irish Parliament, in reports for the Northern Ireland Assembly, for the Senate in Wales, for a Finnish parliamentary. You don't get notified of this stuff.
No.
From listening to you both, it sounds like actually you've had phenomenal impact already. The trick is actually tracking it down and finding out where it's being used.
Yeah, so one of the things I've done, and Sarah, I think you've done as well, is you sometimes see a judgment has come out in an area that you have published on, and you end up emailing the legal teams saying, "Hi, you don't know me, but."
Just to clarify, when he says legal teams, what he means is, say, for example, a big judgment comes down and you hear about it in the news, and each of those judgments would have barristers and solicitors on both sides and their own legal team. We might contact one or both sides of the legal team and say, hello, we were just curious whether this article, which we wrote a year ago, influenced or had come across your radar, or whether it impacted at all on your article, or your book was very influential, thank you very much. And you go, impact.
90% of the time you don't hear back from them. The main thing that I find has been helpful is to just simply keep publishing. You do start to build up a critical mass.
That's true, actually, because, I mean, for a couple of years, I was just keeping my head down, writing articles, getting them published. And then in the last year or so, I must have hit that magic number of publications, because then I started getting random emails from different, like I got an email from a barrister's chambers in London wondering would I come and be on a discussion panel to do with the intersection between asylum and abduction. And I thought, oh, yes, please, I'll come and chat with you about that. The tipping point seems to have been reached.
Congratulations. Well
Thank
done.
you.
Yes.
We should, I think, be proud of research as its own thing, not as an aid to teaching, not as a separate add-on to the university.
We make a big deal of pointing out to the students that, by the way, you're being taught by active researchers who research in this actual area, and so you don't get that with every module.
And we were unapologetic about it. It's really important, and I think that students that buy into it actually get a huge amount out of it. At a high level, you use this kind of work all the time. If you're making an argument as to why a particular person shouldn't have contact with a child, and there's an article about the nature of post-separation abuse that you can use to inform how you approach a case, why would you not do that?
You're actually changing lives for the better.